American Studies Association panel, Deciphering and Defeating the Censorship of Whose Narrative? Gender, Justice, and Resistance, conversation with Leila Khaled. And this is a two-part panel. This is the first of the two. And I'm going to tell you a little bit, we're going to introduce the panelists, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this session and the next session are going to go. And then we'll get started. Just by brief way of introduction, my name is Amaya Gelman from NYU American Studies. And I'm going to introduce our two panelists, Tomomi Kinukawa and Rabab Abdulhadi, and then we have a number of discussants as well. And we are thinking of this as a conversation to hear first from Rabab and Tomomi, and then to open to a conversation among people who are already involved in this and who are thinking about it. So to begin, Tomomi Kinukawa is a lecturer in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies at San Francisco State University. Kinukawa has published in scholarly journals and other media, including the Journal of Women's History and Jinken to Sekatsu. They're completing a book project that analyzes coloniality of the post-World War II Japanese medical system and present a social, cultural, and political history of decolonial health movements among Zainichi Koreans. They hold a PhD in the history of science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Rabab Abdulhadi was born and raised in Nablus, Palestine. Dr. Abdulhadi is the founding director and senior scholar of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program, intended to become the 5th department in the College of Ethnic Studies. Before joining San Francisco State University, she served as the first director of the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan in Dearborn. Widely published as a scholar, activist, and 10-year UN-based journalist with over 80 articles, book chapters, a co-authored book, and several anthologies in 7 languages. She is co-founder and editorial board member of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, policy advisor for Al-Shabaka, and serves on the board of the recently formed International Islamophobia Studies Research Association. Rabab also serves on the board of directors of the National Students for Justice in Palestine, the advisory board of the US Campaign for Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, and the executive committee of California Scholars for Academic Freedom. In addition to many academic awards, such as the Sterling Fellowship, New Century Scholarship, and Evelyn Sheker National Arab American Book Award, as a public intellectual, she's been recognized with community honors, including, but not in any way limited to, the Alex Oda Memorial Award, Lucius Walker for Community Organizing, and the Courage Awards by Al-Auda and American Muslims for Palestine. I'm going to also just run down our quick list of discussants who are joining us, some of whom are here and some not yet. And I'm going to ask that when the discussants speak that you introduce yourselves briefly as well. We have Charlotte Cates, Alexi Folger, Jonathan Buxbaum, at some point also Stephen Roddy, Roz Pacheski, Harry Soloway, David Spiro, Jaime Veve, Nora Khoury, Grace Chamizo is here, Alex Carey, Rua Das, and Hanan Dudin. So with that, welcome, and we're going to begin. This is the rundown. We're going to begin with presentations from Tomomi and Rabab. And then at the end of those presentations, I may jump in and pose a question or two, and then discussants are welcome to join in and either speak or pose questions as you like. And as we go through, I'll try and make sure that things stay clear. And when we're a few minutes from the end, I'll come back in again to make sure that we don't get cut off in mid-thought before we go. So please, I'm not sure who's going first, but Tomomi and Rabab.
Tomomi.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Maya. And so what we'd like to do is, so we are going to talk about silencing of our open classroom last year on September 23rd, 2020. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about like how we prepared for the open classroom and like how our collaboration started. And then Dr. Abdul Hadi will discuss, like, I think, what was the open classroom was about and what took place afterwards. So I'd like to just briefly mention like my background, like where I'm coming from, and then because I think that is relevant, and then I'd like to talk about our collaboration. Is that okay? Or do we need more contextualization? Like, okay, so I'll start. So I identify myself as a queer scholar activist with a mixed Danish Korean and Japanese ancestry. Just very briefly, Danish Korean consist of Koreans, including migrant or wartime conscripted laborers who were residing in Japan at the time of Japan's defeat in 1945. And also Danish Koreans includes those people's descendants who were born in Japan and yet are deemed aliens according to the principle of descent adopted in Japan's 1950 nationality law. So in other words, government of Japan and the Allied occupation forces made them stateless and gave them like refugee-like status. And so that's Danish Korean movement is where I'm coming from. And also I have been involved in what we call transnational quote-unquote comfort women justice movement against far-right Japanese government's historical denialism, and also their refusal to redress its colonial violence called Japanese military sexual slavery system during World War II. So over decades, I have known scholarship by Dr. Rabab Abdul Hadi, like I don't have to say this, but eminent feminist scholar and revered public intellectual, as we all know. And I have included her influential and definitive scholarship, including her co-edited award-winning anthology on Arab and Arab American feminism in my syllabus as a way to introduce students to key transnational anti-colonial feminist theories and praxis over, many times. It was at the National Women's Studies Association annual meeting in 2019, which took place in San Francisco. I met Dr. Abdul Hadi in person for the first time. And it was a special moment because we had a guided tour to the memorial for the Comfort Women Justice movement, memorizing the victims of the Japanese military sexual slavery system. And that had been built in San Francisco in 2017. And Dr. Abdul Hadi gave a really, amazing, powerful speech for a group of transnational feminist scholars, activists, and students. Her speech connected our anti-colonial and gender and queer justice movement based on our collective practice of indivisibility of justice. And so that was the beginning. And then after that conference, I invited Dr. Abdul Hadi to guest lecture in my Women and Gender Studies course. That's an introductory general education course for students coming from all sorts of, very diverse backgrounds and interests. And then Dr. Abdul Hadi gracefully accepted my invitation and invited me to co-organize 2 open classrooms in spring 2020 for students in our classes, as well as for a wider community. And that was the ways in which I was introduced to the history and archives of the innovative Arab Muslim ethnicity and diaspora studies program and its pedagogy, including Ahmed Open Classrooms and Teach Palestine. Although that it was the time, that's when the pandemic abruptly moved our classrooms to online, but we really wanted to stick to our plan and continue, to offer the best classes to our students. And so that entailed in 2 classes in spring 2020, and one is entitled Palestine Feminism, Militancy and Academic Freedom, and the other one is State Repression, Pinkwashing, and Queer and Feminist Resistance. And so in those, I can talk about these open classrooms, but so in the first open classroom, Dr. Abdul Hadi discussed her work on Palestine, Arab American feminism, and transnational feminism, and especially like sharing with us like her formative years of feminism while growing up resisting violence of Israel's colonialism and apartheid. And then we, in the first section, the open classroom, we screened a film on feminist icon Layla Khaled, and Dr. Abdul Hadi helped us to view the film with critical analysis. And so she told us, told us like how, the film both challenges and also is complicit with the Zionist historical revisionism. And Dr. Abdul Hadi also helped us critique the hegemonic gendered misrepresentation of Khaled. In their attempts to undermine Khaled's anti-colonial work. So, and this class became a really, both of these open classrooms became a really a great success. And students really spoke really, positively, but and also passionately about what they learned from the classes, especially in the context of pandemic isolation, racial violence, was in the area of Black Lives Matter uprising and so forth. And so it became really so like because of the success, the great success of these classes, we decided to repeat it again in fall 2020, and that's where I'll stop.
Okay, so I will continue. Actually, we've been talking about this for such a long time, and every single time we ask ourselves, why do we do it again? But before I actually continue talking, I wanted to acknowledge that today is International Indigenous Peoples Day, that San Francisco State University sits on the stolen land of the Ohlone and the Monash people, and that I'm actually on the East Coast now, sitting on the Lenape displaced people. I want to also say that for us, this session is dedicated to the people we hosted on September 23rd, 2020, and were never able to actually broadcast that session publicly because we were silent. So I'm going to mention the names: comrade and feminist icon Layla Khaled, comrade Ronnie Kasriels from South Africa, comrade Laura Whitehorn from New York City, comrade Seiko Odinga from New York as well, and comrade Rula Abu Daho from Birzeit University. Many of you have heard about the history, and if we need to, we can actually elaborate. But I wanted to continue what my colleague, Dr. Kinakawa Tumomi, has started saying, is that why did we even do this? Why did we continue doing it? One of the things that has happened, immediate history for us in Ahmed, is that in the spring of 2020, right before the pandemic, actually we had 2 rooms reserved by the San Francisco State Library. One was to commemorate the Day of Remembrance of the incarceration of Japanese Americans and Japanese people of Japanese descent throughout Latin America and elsewhere in concentration camps during the Second World War, referred to as internment. And the room was canceled in the library all of a sudden. So we had to actually go and do it in a classroom of one of our Asian American studies professor, Wesley. And until now, we do not know what the mystery has happened. This was on February 19th, on the Day of Remembrance, I believe. We had another event that was on February 26th that was scheduled to speak about Afro-Palestinians and Black Palestinian solidarity in honor of Black History Month. And we were going to have it in the library, and all of a sudden the library started telling us that they were actually going to cancel the event because the president and the provost of SFSU were going to tour that room. So we fought against it. We challenged it. We were able to have the event, but it was also interfered with the ability of us to reach out audiences, to bring people together. And the reason I'm mentioning these two events, because they actually symbolize how we work on Ahmed Open Classrooms. We always invite scholars, activists, community leaders, public intellectuals. We bring everybody into the classroom to have conversations among ourselves and with the students. So we can always challenge ourselves and criticize what narratives exist, what dominant narratives, hegemonic narratives exist, and how could we rewrite history, and how could we talk about each other's history, and also bring together the question of justice in for Palestine with the question of the indivisibility of justice for all. So this has been a very long tradition ever since Ahmed. We started it in 2007, again and again and again. This is another discussion. But so we wanted to do that, and the Afro-Palestinian and Black Palestinian solidarity was actually part of two-part series that we were commemorating in 2020, the 50th anniversary of the New York Times very well-known statement by Black radicals in solidarity with Palestine that was published on November 1st, 1970, and that was co-edited by several of our comrades, including Sam Anderson, who we ended up collaborating with and actually doing the series together. So this was part of it to focus specifically on Afro-Palestinian community, and we had also the artist Emery Douglas, who was the cultural artist and editor of the Black Panther Party. His cartoons are very well known, and who has been to Palestine along with Laura Whitehorn and other people on the US prisoner solidarity delegation in 2016, which we've received a lot of grief about from the Zionist groups. So the shutting down. So when we went all online, it was sort of like a breath of fresh air. Now we can actually go public. We can reach out to everybody online on the internet. Now the word was our oyster, if you will. Now we continued doing this. We had a lot of events, as my colleague mentioned, and also during the summer in Ahmed, we actually, right after the murder of George Floyd, we did a lot of activities around Black lives, Black liberation, and the connection with Palestine. We did events on reparation and resistance and the question of indigeneity. We did an event on teaching gender and sexual justice in Arab and Muslim communities. So we've been doing, and then we actually, the week right before the event on September 23rd was shut down. We had a very successful webinar commemorating the Sabra and Shatila massacre with survivors of the massacre, Palestinian women survivors of the massacre, as well as international activists, nurses, doctors who were in Sabra and Shatila at the time of the massacre, September 17th, 1982, to speak about what has happened. So we believe one of the reasons that we were shut down was that the narratives because the title was Whose Narratives? So we were actually trying to say, what history are we teaching? Why do we bring people together? Why do we collaborate with each other? Why are all these people, all these stories are connected with each other? And many people sometimes the ways in which education works in the United States, and this is why there is a big attack on critical ethnic studies. This is a big attack on women and gender and sexuality studies. There is a big attack by the right wing to shut us down and basically prevent students and people at the university of actually doing what we should be doing, i.e. teaching in public universities, engaging with the public, co-learning with each other, presenting different kinds of pedagogy. So we were trying to think about, how do we think about this? Why are these things connected? Why are these histories similar? They're not exactly the same, but they are connected with each other. How do we comparative analysis, critical, without actually idealizing and going for everything as sort of like hunky-dory and so on? We believe the Zionists had a very, very serious problem, the Zionists and their right-wing allies. So we were attacked by various Zionist groups that we can talk about. I don't want to waste too much time on them because actually what we're discussing is really more important. But I will mention the Lawfare Project, the Congress, right-wing congressman from Colorado Springs, Rick Lamborn. They wrote emails about us and letters about us to the Attorney General of the United States, to the Department of Justice. They demanded that we be investigated, that the Department of Education investigators, the Treasury Department. I mean, they were accusing us of material support for terrorism. So we were scrambling to actually find lawyers to just say that this is not so. This is not really the case. And the biggest problem with that is that San Francisco State University administration actually, even though knowing that we were not doing anything illegal, actually thwarted our webinar and participated in preventing us from having it after Zoom due to Zionist campaign of 19,000 messages that came to them from an app called entail, which is part of the Israeli government and the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, pressured them. The university actually did not stand by us, and we can talk about that in the discussion. But I think one of the questions that we're raising is, why is it that Layla Khaled, a 77-year-old woman, grandmother, is so threatening to the Zionists to speak about, to come and actually speak as a person and talk to people, and how she was shut down exactly at the 23rd minute when she was discussing what terrorism means and why is it that Palestinian struggle for self-determination is actually part of internationally upheld right and so on and so forth. She was shut down at that particular time. What was it so scary about that? But then I also want to ask about why is this relevant to American studies? Why are we here in American studies? And why we are actually talking about this actually being relevant to women, gender, and sexuality studies? So I think these are two issues that are become really, really important, as well as all I mentioned about ethnic studies, that this is something that has to do with how knowledge is produced and reproduced, and how we bring into the classrooms, and our responsibilities as educators to be able to speak and not to allow private tech companies like Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and others to actually have a veto on the content of our curriculum. It's our responsibility. I'm not saying it's actually a luxury. It's our responsibility as educators to be able to educate, to learn from our students and teach our students and engage with the public and produce events of that matter to the public. It is our responsibility to challenge. It's also our responsibility to actually change the world. I would argue about that. And actually, Ahmed, on the record, if people even doubt that, on the record, Ahmed is a justice-centered knowledge production program that hasn't been approved as such. But the problem of the Ahmed studies as an institutionalized program is a big problem for the Zionists and the right wing and the white supremacist groups. They would like to shut down this program, as Brooke Goldstein, the executive director of the Lawfare Project, actually said in one of the interviews that, oh, Layla Khaled could speak, they could speak wherever they want, but they cannot make this as part of the legitimate classrooms. And this rises in sync with the attacks by Stand With Us, by the Academic Engagement Project, by Hillel, by Anti-Defamation League, by all the Israel lobby industry, and it is an industry, in order to shut down any possibilities to engage and critique. Are you kind of signaling me that I'm running out of time, Imaya?
I am not. I'm not signaling, but it would be maybe if we.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to do. So it is a question of kind of like thinking about that. What is the responsibility? Then secondly, this also relates, and I wanted to highlight that, to our project Teaching Palestine, Pedagogical Praxis and the Indivisibility of Justice, that actually thinks about how different anniversaries, and we officially started the program. We've been doing it for a very long time, but we officially started it in 2016 towards 2000, because 2017, 2018, 2019 were the anniversaries of the strike at San Francisco State, of the massacre of Mexican students on October 2nd, of the uprisings in France, in Tunisia, in Senegal, around, then people say May 68, but it's not, it's 68. And so we wanted to actually think about how do these anniversaries, when we bring them together, how do we think about what these narratives are all about? How do we remember what we remember? To what purpose do we remember? Who is actually doing the remembrance? Whose histories are being completely invisibilized and erased? And what is our responsibility, again, as public intellectuals and scholars to do that? So this is a very big question that I raise as relating to ASA, relating to women, gender, and sexuality studies, relating to critical ethnic studies, relating to the humanities, relating to the social sciences. Why do we do what we do? Why do we teach what we teach? Why is it that we gather evidence? Why is it that we analyze and publish and so on? Do we do it in order for us to aggrandize our own individual careers? Or do we have a mission for which we actually decided to enter into the academy in order for us to see the academy as one site of resistance to producing critical knowledge, to producing another kind of knowledge that actually then open classroom become really open classrooms, open to everybody. So the classroom is not only the classroom per se at the university, but as Palestinian prisoners always say, prison is a university. And this is not only the experience of Palestinians, but also it's the experience of Black liberation movement, of indigenous people, of people who are critical all over the world, that you enter the prison, you engage with other people, you create critical experiences, and you actually come out actually trying to change the world. So this is what we are trying to do. And this is where this is very relevant. I did not talk a lot about at all actually about why this is relevant to women, gender and sexuality studies. I mentioned it is important, but I did not show, neither me nor Tomomi has done that. But we can actually have the events that we've done and the film and the critique of it and the whole ways in which the silences of a woman, for example, who's a Palestinian like Layla Khaled, should not be interpreted as a sign of domestication, as a sign of repression, but maybe as a different sign of collectivity and so on. We wanted to talk about that, but we maybe will be able to talk about that in the discussion period, so I will stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate the clarity with which you've laid out both what happened and also why it's important and what you're trying to do, what the purpose was. What I didn't mention at the beginning was that we were going to take this session to do that, to talk through sort of what are the structures of repression that are evidenced here and what are the tactics. And that in the second session that we were going to continue the conversation by sort of thinking through what this means for post-COVID teaching in a tech-heavy environment, and also for the American Studies Association, and what the specific channels are for action afterward. So just before opening it up to everyone, I wanted to pose a question. You laid out very clearly how lawfare, the sort of private use of law, and also privately owned tech have been kind of leveraged as almost as forces of governance in this context, against conversations about justice and also against academic freedom just as a practice. But there's also the part where they're leveraging public institutions, right? They're leveraging the university and presumably other institutions and activating other forces. And so I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about what that relationship means and how we should be thinking about that between the increasing power of tech and particularly state, conservative owned and state-backed tech, as much Israeli tech is, and public institutions. How should we be thinking about that? And if there are other forces that are activated that we should also be thinking through. And I'm putting this question to you, Rabab, and to Momi, but also inviting other people who are in the Zoom to chime in.
Do we want to actually maybe kind of like take rounds and then we can intervene? So the session would be, I mean, Tomomi and I have spoken about this a lot, so it actually might be good to hear from our colleagues, comrades who are on it. You're okay with that, Tomomi? It's okay, Nakawa? Yeah, and so we hear from everybody and then we can engage in this conversation because everybody has something to say here. If that's okay with you.
Please.
And I should say Dr. Gilman, because you have just received your PhD this spring from NYU, so welcome. And maybe I see that our colleague Bill Mullen, Professor Mullen wants to say something, so I'm gonna step back.
I'll take, can you hear me okay? I'll take, well, first I want to say thank you to Rabab and Tomomi for not just taking this incredible measure of bringing Layla Khaled into the classroom and using the space to advocate for Palestinian liberation, which I think shows us again what the task in the university is these days. And I also want to thanks for the invitation to talk about this a bit. I'm speaking from the Midwest part of what's called the United States on Shawnee territory. Yeah, my point to make about the Zoom shutdown would be, I guess, this. When President Mahoney, I believe her name is, at San Francisco State, released her statement about the shutdown, she said, well, we disagree, but we recognize that Zoom is a private company that basically can do what it wants. Well, this is pretty scary stuff for us, right? Because it means effectively that the rights of students and the rights of teachers are subordinated to the rights of a private company, and a private company that's willing to engage in the interest of the US state in erasing voices, political voices, particularly Palestinian voices. So it's kind of like a two-headed monster we suddenly face, where the university and the state, maybe it's three-headed, and private companies all are engaged in a kind of conspiracy against the right to speak. And I think that's why it was so important what you did, because it actually forced Zoom briefly to say, well, maybe we need to take a look at our policy. Well, we need to have this happen every single day. We need to actually go directly into the teeth of these companies that are trying to restrict our ability to have political discourse, and do what Rabab and Tomomi does, which is say challenge exactly these restrictions. And Charlotte may speak a little bit about the US ACB protest, which I thought was also a brilliant campaign against what Zoom was trying to do by shutting it down. So I won't talk about that right now, but I will say that what I found really inspiring too is that we have to think outside of like the tech box that we live in academia sometimes to deliver information to students. In some ways, having the internet and access to the kind of session we're having today means we can reach more people, and we can do it in subversive ways. As about the same time as Rabab and Tomomi were having their battle with Zoom, I was involved with something called Palestine Rights, which is a Palestinian literature festival, which actually Rabab also took part in. And we had planned to have that live at NYU. COVID hit, we had to shut it down. So we actually went to a Pakistani platform called VFairs and asked them if they would be willing to host the festival. Well, they didn't give a you know what, that it was about Palestinian literature. In fact, they thought this was fantastic. We want to support our Palestinian brothers and sisters in bringing the voices of writers to the world. I don't know that we would have gotten that kind of reaction from an American-based company, okay? It was really important to us that they felt that they were politically invested in this project. And as a result, instead of reaching like the 500 people that probably would have come to NYU, we had more than 3,000 people attend the festival. So there is subversive potentiality in the matrix that we live in, and we have to be kind of insurgent in our thinking about working in other venues outside of the common venues that might be available to us, but also challenging directly the big monopoly monoliths like Zoom and Facebook that are going to continue to try to control our voices. So that's just one of my takeaways from this really, really important episode. I'll stop.
Are we supposed to just chime in? Okay, because I raised my hand. I'm not sure like what we're supposed to be doing, but
I'm so sorry, I didn't see that. So Alexi and then Charlotte.
yeah, no worries. So I'm Alexi Folger. I am an alum of San Francisco State University many moons ago, but still close to my heart. Also coming to you from Ohlone land, otherwise known as San Francisco. And there's a bunch of points, but there's kind of two that I want to make. One is following up on what Bill just said. I actually work in tech, so I was a political philosophy major, you know, the ultimate, do you want fries with that degree? But now I work in tech, and so I'm like sort of hypercritical of it in many ways. And I want to encourage people to demystify it. You know, like, what would Mahoney have done if some catering company had refused to, you know, cater an academic conference on the campus for some reason? Right, that would not have been tolerated, right? And no one would have said, oh, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want, you know? And so, you know, just in life in general, I'm like, you know, there's no free pass for tech companies. And, you know, they need to be held accountable as much as any company that refuses to bake a cake for anyone or anything else. And I think that sort of gets lost in the shuffle somewhere. And the other point, which is quite different actually, is that I think it's also very important to be clear that this is an attack on ideas, and it is an attack on the production and distribution of knowledge. And it's often couched as, oh, we're against this terrorist, this individual person. You know, they always try to target it that way. I'm active with a group called Jewish Voice for Peace. We are Jews and allies who are anti-Zionist. And we have been banned from the San Francisco Jewish Community Center, right? Our own communal institutions have banned their fellow Jews. And I personally was once pepper sprayed by a fellow Jew for my ideas. That's another issue. But the point is it is an attempt to shut down discourse and to erase ideas. It may be done in the name of anti-Semitism, but even when Jews like me have these ideas, they are actively and aggressively silenced on and off campus, including anti-Zionist Jewish students who have to go to, you know, whose places for support are programs like Ahmed, because the Jewish institutional arrangements on campuses are not supportive of them because of the ideas, right? So anyone who is tempted to think this is some kind of a one-off thing, or that it's going after particular people, it is not. It is going after you know, a whole area of thought, which really most fundamentally has to do with the universality of human rights. So think about that for a moment, because that's really the stakes that we're talking about here. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to touch on a point that's a little similar to the point that was made by Alexi, but also build on what Bill was discussing regarding the US ACTB Day of Action in support of Rabab and Tamomi and Layla Khalid and the event, which is, you know, this was an organizational plan that was taken up by the US Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel to put together kind of a symbolic video of different clips of Layla Khalid speaking at her various public events and interviews that she has given over time, including clips of her speaking to South African Broadcasting Channel, which is the official government television station, major news channel in South Africa, including clips of her speaking on a Zoom, which took place only a few weeks after this event, except it wasn't an academic event. That's kind of one of the things that I want to touch on there as well, and a few other events, and compiling them together into a concise video to present some of Layla's ideas and thoughts and views about Palestine and combine them with discussions and events and presentations by professors, by students, by activists and others. And of course, Bob and Tamomi themselves were invited to and participated in a number of these events. And there was a kind of a spectrum of outcomes for these different events. Some of them were once again shut down by Zoom. And again, these were universities with large contracts with Zoom that did not take a stand, because one of the principles behind this event was specifically to host them on university Zoom accounts in order to make once again this demand to universities that they stop allowing private corporations to completely moderate the space of what is acceptable discourse and academic inquiry at their university. And so we saw events like at NYU, at New York University, were shut down by Zoom, and at the University of Hawaii, whereas at several of other universities, including University of Western Ontario and Loyola University in Chicago, these events went forward. So there was a mixture of kind of outcomes in this regard. But one thing that it also did emphasize, once again, was the necessity to organize on campus to push back against the ability of a private corporation to determine, oftentimes at public universities, for that matter, public universities, which under the law, just like San Francisco State University, are prohibited from engaging in content-based discrimination, that this private corporation is then allowed to do so on the university's behalf, while the university pays it potentially millions of dollars per year for very valuable contracts. I should say I failed to introduce myself. My name is Charlotte Cates. I'm the international coordinator of Sami Dune Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, and I'm also on the organizing collective of the US campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel and out of the Palestine Rights Return Coalition. So we've had the opportunity to work with Bob and with Tamomi and with many comrades here in different capacities. But so one thing that I kind of wanted to bring up was this, the necessity of a specifically academic response and a specific response to the Zoomification of campus discourse. Because it's interesting to note that this isn't the only event with Layla Khaled that took place in this time frame. So a few weeks following this event, I was on the organizing committee of another event being organized by the International League of People's Struggles, which is a global activist and anti-imperialist organization. And this was their Zoom for November, which was being marked by ILPS as a month of solidarity with the Palestinian people. And Layla Khaled was the keynote speaker for that event. And this event was publicized and it was on Zoom, and it went ahead and went forward. And I believe we actually used some of those clips in the US ACB response events that were organized around the country. So this event, while it did face Zionist attacks, didn't face nearly, I would say, the level of focused or pinpointed Zionist attacks that the entry of Layla's voice into the university did. And that specifically, this obviously this is not to mitigate the overall atmosphere of criminalization or to minimize the importance of community solidarity, but to note that there is a strategic action that is being taken by the Zionist movement, specifically intended to limit the boundaries of academic inquiry around Palestine very substantially, and specifically to exclude any voices associated with the Palestinian resistance from that inquiry, from that academic exploration, discussion, and conversation. And that this same standard is not applied to all of the Zooms that take place. If one goes on, Facebook on any given weekend and reads in Arabic, you will see many events taking place in Arabic with many members of Palestinian resistance organizations speaking on behalf of those organizations with a link to join on Zoom. This is not something that is in and of itself unusual, but the level of attack that was directed against this event and the level of attack that was directed against the events following it were part of a specific strategy designed to create a narrow window, a very narrow window of what could be acceptable discourse about Palestine on the university campus, and that essentially winds up excluding the largest majority or the general political sentiment or the organizations that are the most relevant political organizations representing Palestinians inside Palestine and in the Arab world. And so that there's a, you know, there's a censorship of ideas that is taking place. And there's also a very specific fencing in of political discourse in an academic space to say that these voices must not be allowed to enter a classroom. And that we can also see the same thing taking place, for example, in trade unions, churches, and other kinds of venues that are recognized as kind of socially important spaces for discourse. So, for example, in Toronto, last year, we saw the concerted attempt to cancel an event being hosted by the Palestinian Youth Movement that was the launching of their Ghassan Kanafani literature project. This was literally simply a project honoring young Palestinian writers today. It was, you know, this is what the project was. It wasn't even one of the most political events hosted by this organization, but this specific idea of Ghassan Kanafani being discussed not just as a novelist and a writer, but as a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and who was a spokesperson for resistance activities and operations, being accepted into the United Church of Canada or the Steelworkers Hall, where the event actually did go forward, was specifically targeted by these attacks as something that was unacceptable. And so I just want to, I also love to hear, of course, Rabab and Tamomi speak further to this in terms of the specific ways in which Zoom worked as a big tech corporation, the same way we see with Facebook, Instagram, and all of these other big tech corporations, you know, working hand in hand with the interests of the state, working hand in hand with the interests of these kind of large Zionist organizations that are often backed by the Israeli government, engaging in lawfare campaigns, and the way in which the university is complicit in that regard.
Let me see, Rabab, if you want to respond to that, and then Jonathan maybe line up after.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, if Jonathan, do you want to speak to this particular point? Do you want to speak to something? Okay. So I think I want to add to what, thank you all. I want to add to, which I think, you know, Charlotte is part of the stuff that you've written, but you didn't mention it today, is that Ghassan Kanafani was assassinated, was part of the Palestinian leadership, intellectuals who was assassinated by a Mossad squad of the Israeli intelligence agency that was led by the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, who was always welcomed and brought into the US. And many of the Palestinian intellectuals were assassinated. And if people in American studies, for example, like don't really understand the context, they may actually think about the assassination of a whole slew of leaders in the 60s and the 70s. One of the documentaries that we actually bring into our classroom and discuss is called COINTELPRO 101, which talks about the counterintelligence program against the American Indian movement, Black Panthers, Chicana movement, the Puerto Rican movement, the Iroquois, and all the other movements that were actually challenging, which also speaks to the point that Alexi was talking about. And I wanted to actually speak specifically about, kind of like, this is one of the things that, just to highlight further the points that everybody was speaking about, is that a lot of the history of Palestine, of the Palestinian resistance movement, and a lot of the history of resistance movement and anti-colonial movement, and even opposition movement, you don't even have to say resistance or anti-colonial, around the world are not known in the US, are not in the US Academy. The history of the United States itself is not known. I mean, the history of the US as a settler colonial state, the history, some of the stuff came out about the slave patrols during the movement, the Black uprisings, I mean, that really sprung up in 2 years ago. But a lot of the stuff is not known. A lot of the stuff is not known about the Trail of Tears, about the whole things about this, the intended genocide against indigenous people. All of the stuff is not known, let alone stuff around histories of people around the world. And one of the things in the Palestinian Arabic, in Arabic writing, for example, and I think I really want to bring this point because I think intellectually it's important, while we'll also advocate, is what is it that we're advocating for? So one of the issues is that, yes, Layla Khaled did hijack 2 planes. One of the things we were actually trying to discuss in Professor Kinakawa's class in the spring, and we actually discussed and we were trying to do them again in the fall, was what does this mean? What does it mean? How was she seen around the world? I mean, Angela Davis has been asked multiple times, how do you feel when you see your face on t-shirts? What do you feel about that? Many of the leading women who have actually organized and led, like Audre Lorde, like Adrienne Rich, like Emma Goldman, Angela Davis, June Jordan, and so on, have been vilified at one time or another in this history. But some of it sort of like, I think part of the problem is that, and I think part of the challenge for American studies and for all our studies, not, American studies as I would say area study, that discusses the US and now it's expanded to the Americans. But one of the challenges to think about, how do we understand these histories and how do we not exceptionalize? While we do comparative studies, how do we not exceptionalize one particular experience, which speaks to Alexi talking about the whole question about ideas, speaks about Bill challenging the whole question of what does it mean to actually be able to reach the world? I mean, in our webinar in July 2020, we had over 15,000 people attend a panel of Black scholars. It was called Black Lives, Black Liberation, and the Indivisibility of Justice. And we were doing it jointly with Al-Adab, Palestinian journal, Arab journal, Lebanese, and we were trying to do it we did it in Arabic and in English, which is also in itself a very big task to do. And we were trying to ask questions that would be interested to audiences who speak Arabic and to audiences who speak English. And of course, I mean, some people even complain while we're doing the translation. We're saying, actually, this is what knowledge is all about. This is how we undermine the primacy and the dominance and hegemony of English as a colonial language that actually dominates the world and so on. This is what we think about all of these issues. How do people understand certain things? So to get back to the hijacking, there were a lot of discussions then. They continue to be discussions throughout and until today, whether hijacking, plain hijacking, and what the Palestinian lingo is called amaliyat al-kharijiyya, external operations. Is this something people agree with or don't agree with? There is a huge debate about that we are not allowed, and I'm saying we are not allowed, and we weren't allowed, or we were criminalized for actually even trying to have somebody who talks about it. And Ronnie Casriz wrote several times and wrote articles and wrote in Mundo Wise and actually challenged some of his South African people who were with him in school, who wrote him really nasty letters about Layla Khaled and about the people we were, you can read his article to see how they were referring. But this is all the discussion that keeps coming up, and the whole question of what a terrorist becomes not a terrorist and so on. Oscar Lopez Rivera, the same thing has happened. But this stuff, I think this is the question for us, is what does comparative analysis mean? What does it really mean for us to actually learn from each other, compare and challenge each other, not to have the answers, that we don't necessarily have the answers at the end. At the end of a session, we have more questions that will be the basis for the next open classroom, for the next discussion, to figure out how does it fit here, how does it fit there, and so on. So I think this is kind of like really was really important. And I also wanted to just also add one point about, the whole question of, Alexi talking about the catering company. I kept asking again and again that if a pipe breaks in the classroom, whose responsibility it is to provide us another venue? So Zoom, and I'm not sidestepping the discussion about neoliberalism and private tech companies and so on. We can come back to that. But when a classroom pipe breaks, when the AC breaks, when the media falters, when you're showing a video in the classroom, whose responsibility is it? The first thing you do is you call administration, maintenance. The administration is supposed to come to fix it. You're not supposed to, as a faculty member, to actually fix what has going on. So the very idea of who responds for the classroom, who's responsible for it, in a public university, in a private university too, who's responsible for it? What's the role of the faculty vis-a-vis the administration, vis-a-vis the institution, and vis-a-vis the connections that the institution has with its corporate partners, and of course, a lot of the stuff is sort of like mystified to cover all of these things, whose responsibility it is, and what happens with that. And I will stop at here because I see Tomomi has her hand up, and I know Jonathan.
Jonathan, would you like, I mean, I just have a quick follow-up on what both Rabab and the rest of you are saying, that I think it's important that even before our open classroom took place, San Francisco SFSU administration issued like a statement about academic freedom. And I just want to point out that like, this is a very specific context in which all these things happen, like we already talked about. But what they were like saying in the statements are kind of repetition of what they have been doing for a long time, like the ways in which Ahmed studies have been attacked by the university and by Zionists, and like and I think that same kind of you know, like Islamophobic language that was repeated, and I think what was really disturbing for me was like it is silencing, but not only just silencing us, but it is that the administration was speaking the exact same language with the Zionists, and like they were like, you know, like that. So like they used this opportunity to kind of amplify and consolidate that particular kind of narrative, so like and then so I think, and then the whole like you know, like a notion of academic freedom has been kind of was used and appropriated, I guess, for their for them to make the point. And so I don't know if we want to talk more about the specifics of their statements and so forth, and then their and also I think Dr. Hadi already mentioned, but there, you know, like it is disturbing that actually SFSU administration is openly collaborating with Zionist organizations, like, you know, like more recently with the Hillel and also AN, and also and when our classroom took place on September 23rd last year, on the same day, Hillel organized the online what they called like a video for that, and to, in their words, to commemorate victims of terrorism, and then and SFSU actually publicly sponsored the event, which was also co-sponsored by Israel Consulate and also multiple Zionist organizations, and that is SFSU's you know, the Center for the Diversity. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact wording, but and they were like publicly and formally sponsoring that event, and so, and there wasn't that much. What really bothers me, like it's on campus, like what are other people doing? Like when the, you know, like all these official like, you know, SFSU departments are actually, you know, centers are involved in the Islamophobic anti-racist projects, so I just feel like, well, it is not only about, that this is about like, yeah, like knowledge production, as many of you are saying, and like it is about epistemic, and then I think the neoliberal university's role in this is very like, I don't know, they need to be made accountable. So just.
Jonathan, do you want to comment?
Sure. So I'd like to start also by thanking Tomomi and Rabab for inviting me to join the discussion today. I recently retired after many years as a teacher of media studies at Queens College in New York, which is part of the City University of New York, which has many campuses. And it's probably I think it is the largest urban university in the country. And it is also where Rabab went to undergraduate. She's a graduate of Hunter College, one of the four-year schools in CUNY. And I met Rabab and started collaborating with her back in 2014 when we tried to build support for Rabab's freedom of speech, as it were, within the union of the City University of New York. And I'm speaking both as an academic, and here we are in an academic conference, which actually has a very broad, in this small group, a very broad representation, not simply of academics, as so many disciplinary conferences are composed primarily of academics. And I'm not suggesting that the ASA is not primarily that, but here we are as activists. And I have been an activist within the union at CUNY, which is a 30,000 member union. So it's not an insignificant or a small union. And we wanted to build support for Rabab's freedom of speech, as it were. And the union was very skittish about Palestine. It didn't want to single out or exceptionalize freedom of speech for Palestinians, because of course everyone has the right to freedom of speech. And we objected to this, that is, we, the activists within the union, because we wanted to make sure that people reading our resolutions understood where it came from and why we were compelled to write a resolution in support of Palestinians and that discourse within academia. And in fact, we formed a little group called CUNY for Palestine, which was a group of primarily academics, and it included some students who were committed to supporting freedom of speech movement, let's say, within our union. But more recently, and this has been an interesting development, our union formed in response to Black Lives Matter an anti-racism committee. And the first act of the anti-racism committee was to write a resolution following the attacks on Gaza and in Jerusalem in the spring, write a resolution in support of Palestinians and in support of BDS, and describing the conflict or the occupation as settler colonial and apartheid. The union went crazy over this. It passed the delegate assembly, which is the elected leadership of the union. It passed overwhelmingly. But the leadership immediately tried to just distance itself from the resolution by saying that, well, they didn't support it because of some of these claims. And we had many members calling up the union, threatening to resign because the delegate assembly elected officials passed the resolution. So what was interesting about it, I think for us, for me certainly, was that the anti-racism committee somehow crossed so-called disciplinary boundaries to express solidarity with Palestine, something that Rabab was talking about only recently, going back to San Francisco State back in '68. So that kind of exceptionalizing of a particular discourse, in this case Palestine, is something that I think Zionists and academic administrators are often trying to repress, because they want to make sure that certain subjects are not allowed to take place in academic discourse. So it turns out that two other committees supported the anti-racism committee, but I think it signals, and we see other examples of this also with, because Charlotte actually referred to trade unions. We are a trade union within academia. Therefore, we're seeking to make connections and solidarities with other trade unions and other academic organizations. I see that actually San Diego Community College in September, passed a resolution in support of Palestine. So we're seeking to build ties within academia and beyond. And as I say, we have 30,000 members. We're trying to encourage other groups at other universities to follow suit. I mean, NYU has some supportive people as well, and that was why Zoom canceled their seminar as well. As far as the tech work goes, I think that COVID has really brought this to the fore, because now we're also dependent on Zoom or other kinds of platforms that they have an excessive power. The tech companies that provide that service have an excessive power, and universities haven't figured out or haven't committed to supporting academic freedom in ways that they should be. That is the responsibility of the university, private or public. I mean, the AAUP doesn't distinguish between private and public universities. Academic freedom cuts across the board. So the tech companies, they're private, okay. But how is the university culture and how is the government going to handle these questions of private, public issues of freedom, which Rabab, I think, correctly describes as indivisible? That is, the problem with Mahoney was that she didn't take her responsibility seriously to make sure that academic freedom was protected, as we argued in the recent hearing at San Francisco State. She couldn't control Zoom, okay. But that was, in my view, somewhat irrelevant, because that was not her responsibility. Her responsibility was to protect the classroom for academic freedom. She did not do that, just as other schools are refusing to do it. So in a way, I'm saying I'm encouraging all of us to build the solidarity among academia, among activists, among trade unions as well, in the hope that we'll be able to gain more space within academia for discourse on Palestine and, let's say, indigenous rights, among many other elements that have been suppressed or even repressed within academia. I also want to apologize because I'm going to have to get off shortly since I have another Zoom coming up. So I'll stay with it for a few minutes, but thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much. I wondered, Tomomi, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the events and the effort to try and rally and organize people to take this up.
Okay, sure. And can I just talk briefly about like the whole the whole question of material support for terrorism, the whole thing, like just very briefly, that so like it was like on September 14th, before that webinar, the Lawfare Project actually wrote to the Department of Justice and saying that our classrooms count as like unlawful provision of material support for terrorism, and like citing the U.S. law, and then they also also they reached the pressure to the Zoom, Zoom also, I think many of you can talk about this better than I do, but the Zoom, and there was a discussion between Zoom and CSU about this whole issue about the legality and illegality of the classroom. And the CSU, before our classroom, on September 23rd, a couple of days before at least, they knew that our classroom doesn't violate any laws, like there's no issue. Like we know that from the record of their email exchanges. But what I mean, like one of the most disturbing and also scary thing that happened to us is that like on September 18th, the Provost Summit wrote email to us and warning that our custom might violate the US law. And then no, just to sum it up really quick, I mean, like briefly, like and then she said, like, we have to look for our own lawyers and assess the risk, and then yeah, like and then she also stated that there is a limit to academic freedom, like and so like a violation, like so yeah, so like just put us in or I mean, like left us or by ourselves to kind of defend ourselves and hire lawyers and to prove that like our customs are not violating any laws. And then a couple of days later, when CSU knew that actually our custom doesn't violate any laws, like the SFSU administration never corrected what they said, emailed us, and so until to this day, I mean, like they didn't correct like the email by Provost Summit, and so so that I mean, I think Dr. Abdradi can talk about more about this, but so that actually put us in the position like seeking lawyers, like worrying about like what happens. I'm permanent resident in this country, and like so like am I going to be deported and so forth. Like there are lots of questions that like under this like a very, I mean, that under the climate of Trump administration, it really did scare me and also my like a partner and like extended family, etc. Like and so and yeah, so I just want to say that it's like this whole process acted like a kind of a form of violence against us, and so the at many levels. So yeah, I will stop and.
Bob, are you waiting for me to call on you?
Yeah. So I wanted to actually follow up on what Tomomi was saying about the provost actually threatening us. And the ways the email that the provost sent us actually said, we heard from some people, and we know now that some people was the Lawfare Project, that you might file a fine or imprisonment. And so, yeah, go fend for yourself, go find your own lawyers and so on. And we actually asked the university to defend us, and they said, oh, when you get attacked, and this has been going on again and again and again, that Jonathan also spoke about that when we had posters by the David Horowitz and the Canary Mission placed on campus around us, and my students and I, we were feeling horrified about it, and my colleagues. The university said, if you feel threatened, and we're saying, well, we're feeling threatened. And then they say, if you feel threatened, this is who you call. And this is from 9 to 5 and so on. So this has happened again and again and again. And I want to speak a little bit about that. This is not new. I mean, ever since what Jonathan's talking about, ever since the reason the Ahmed Studies program was started in the first place, and I was recruited to San Francisco State, was because San Francisco State has been actually embroiled in a battle with Palestinian students, their supporters, and the community, and what we call the historical orgs. The historical orgs of San Francisco State are composed of the General Union of Palestine students, SKIN, Student Council for Intertribal Nations, MECHA, League of Filipino Students, RASA, the students who are representing all the various groups and so on, and who have came as a result of the 1968 strike and for Black Student Union. So all these students have actually come together, and they demanded that San Francisco State build a college for third world studies. Of course, the university tracked back and said ethnic studies in order to camouflage. Is it really race? Is it ethnicity? Is it identities? Is it about politics? Is it about racism and so on? And of course, that discussion still continues. And we can all of us here actually are well versed in it, and we've spoken about it so many times before. So when I was recruited to come, and many others were recruited, and I got the job. Basically, it was to build a program that addresses these kind of issues. And at that time, there was a big battle again between the Palestinian students, other supporters, and the university to start the Palestinian mural honoring the late Professor Edward Said. And there was a huge battle over the symbols, two symbols on the mural that the Zionists objected to. One was Hamdallah, the cartoon figure drawn by the Palestinian cartoonist Najil Ali, who was also assassinated by the Mossad. And it represents a Palestinian refugee child, with his back to the world, 10-year-old, barefoot, which is very interesting because it also connects with the San Jose State University athletes at the Olympics who actually stood when they raised their fists in 1968. They stood without shoes, and in order to represent slavery, the history of slavery and the rejection for it and Black power at that time. Anyway, so Hamdallah has this, they objected to Hamdallah. They objected to Hamdallah carrying in one hand the pen, which Ghassan Kanafani always said, my pen is my sword, my gun. And in the other hand, he carried a key. On top of it, the word al-Auda, return, was written, symbolizing the displacement of Palestinian refugees, and that more than half of the Palestinian population is still displaced since 1948. And we now have fifth generation. The Zionists protested, the university president and the Zionists protested to the mural, and they said that this represents violence against Jews. This creates a hostile climate for Jews on campus, because if Palestinians were able to return to the lands of their ancestors, this will threaten, quote unquote, the Jewish character of the Israeli state. And so the university actually sided again with the Zionist argument against the Palestinians. We know this is actually now in Palestine studies, in international studies, Middle East studies, in American studies, in all sorts of justice studies, that this is a contested issue. This is not a done deal. And there is much more support for Palestinian right of return than has ever been. But the university sided with them and actually blocked the symbol. So they were in debate. And when I came, I actually was one of the people who negotiated the mural. Now, the Zionists have had a problem with having a program, an institutionalized program that studies Arabs, Muslims, ethnicities, and diasporas, that is not area studies, that does not think only about identities, that actually talks about justice and centers also Palestine and understanding and teaching Palestine. They've continued attacking it. And actually, when we did the searches for our faculty lines in 2009, the university president canceled the faculty lines because the students invited for the mural anniversary, Omar Barghouti, the co-founder of the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, and the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel group, invited him to come and speak at the university after the massacre of Gaza in 2008-2009. So they shut it down, they shut us down, and the university president canceled our searches, and we were never able to have the faculty we need. The reason I'm saying this is because there is a very clear correlation between us building the program, institutionalizing the armed studies program, and the Zionist attacks. The more we institutionalize, the attacks increased. In 2013, 2014, we were about to submit the minor proposal. All of a sudden, all of the attacks increased. And then when what Jonathan spoke about 2014, the Amcha initiative, which one of the leading Zionist, racist organizations in California that's goes against all academics and all students and all faculty, started attacking me and saying, what does this mean? She wants to build relations with Palestinian universities. Palestinian universities themselves are terrorist universities, which was criminalizing Palestinian education, which was actually saying that Palestinian presidents of universities who were deported, it was okay. Palestinian students who were imprisoned, it's okay. Palestinian faculty who were put in prison and tortured and deported, it was okay. All of this stuff was okay. I mean, basically justifying what Israel is doing and covering it up. The attack continued again over our delegations to Palestine. An attack continued also when the Lawfare Project in 2017 sued the university and me over what they claim to be creating a hostile climate for Jewish students on campus. The lawsuit failed big time. It was dismissed with prejudice in federal court. But the Lawfare executive director, Brooke Goldstein, and I want to remind people of the video that is available on Electronic Intifada because they took it down, in which the executive director of Lawfare says, we're going to make the enemy pay. We're going to exact a heavy price of anybody who advocates for Palestine. What is Palestine? What is Islamophobia? These things don't exist. And sure enough, They keep after us, and the same group that has been, we defeated them, but they keep coming again and again. And the more we build relations with Palestinian universities, Campus Watch, Middle East Forum comes after us. The more we do delegations, there is attacks. And the university is very much involved in this, the criminalization of teaching Palestine, the criminalization of the Ahmed Studies program. The more we build and the more we collaborate and the more we educate the way we should be doing it, the more there is more and more and more attacks. So I will just give one example by the provost, same provost who sent us the letter telling us that we will be imprisoned. The same provost actually denied my request for funding, which is part of my contract, by the way, travel, to teaching Palestine conferences in Palestine and in claiming all sorts of technical language. When she demanded, and to speak about Alexi's thing, she demanded that I take down the Facebook page, which I posted the page of the Jews Against Zionism, a student group, my students, who posted saying that we do not welcome Zionists to San Francisco State. We actually support justice in for Palestine. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. She demanded and she threatened me with disciplinary measures if I don't take the Facebook page down. Now, the short end of the story is that in April, Facebook actually took down the whole Ahmed Facebook page, the whole Facebook with our archives, our syllabi, our posts, our everything we have posted, it all been taken down. And the University, San Francisco State University did not say a single word, not a single word to protect the archives of very important project. On the contrary, what SFSU is trying to do is to undermine and cut down Ahmed again and again in collaboration with the Zionist donors. On the day that San Francisco State University president, September 14th, published and opened in J Weekly, the newsletter of the Jewish Community Relations Council, which is a Zionist group, which trained the university in Zionism, and it's on the university website, it's not even a secret. The university was congratulated by the main fundraiser for the Jewish Federation of San Francisco that has been exposed in the Jewish Forward by Skoda, by many people, as actually giving funding, not only to the Zionist groups, but also to very right-wing, homophobic, white supremacist groups, and so on and so forth. So there is the relationship is very tight. And I think this is something we really need to talk about. The whole question between the neoliberal agenda is very much tied with the Zionist and right-wing agenda, irrespective of what neoliberal administrators like the president of the university claim that, oh, we are supporting academic freedom. This is only condemnation of terrorism and so on and so forth. This is the same speak as the Zionists because they have a problem with a program like Ahmed that actually challenges power in every single way. And they are trying to punish and discipline and make us completely erase in order for them to not create the 68 moment again.
Thanks, thanks, Robo. Jonathan's leaving us. I have two questions. Although if anybody else has questions, I invite you to overwrite me. One question that I have is, so turning specifically to the university, not to tech companies, not to donors even, but to the people who are making decisions to abandon or to impose labor on you, or to facilitate criminalization, and the sort of fake remediation processes that you're required to go through, you know, as Tomomi called it, death by 10,000 cuts. I know that we're in the next session, we're going to talk about what we want, right? What are the solutions? But I wonder if you could talk for a minute about whether you really expect better from the university as it is, whether the idea of justice comes from the university as it is, or if there's a sort of larger vision that this has produced. I mean, not this alone, but a larger vision of what academic freedom requires that doesn't exist. From any of you, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think we want to say bye to Alexi. Thank you so much for being here. I think this is something that the question for all of us. And I think I would really like everybody to chime in about what do we expect the university, then we can say what is our agenda in the next panel. I don't know. I mean, to be very honest, I really don't know, because some of the union, our union, California Faculty Association, has been really, really struggling very hard and has had our back. Hasn't been always the case, which is very similar to the story that Jonathan told us about PSC CUNY. It's been really difficult. And if we had had that support, let's say in 2009, we would not be here today. We would have had our faculty lines, we would have the critical mass. I wouldn't be the only faculty member. We would have been able to at least have more people to fight for the program. And what has happened throughout is that the more Zionist attacks that happen, and the more the Zionists had worked with the university, and I think this is the way power works, because sometimes people think, why did it happen here? No, it's happening everywhere the same way. I think what with us is that because we keep fighting and we keep like standing up, and because I'm a token person, I mean, that makes it really, really difficult. If we had more people in the program, it would be so much different than it's just me, that the dean, my dean, called me a broken record, because I'm the one who argues that we really need to have Arabic language. We need to have captioning in Arabic. We need to have films in the library. We cannot only say Middle East studies. We cannot, I mean, I'm constantly fighting with all of these issues, only because there is nobody else named in Ahmed to be able to do it. And Ahmed has been, they're trying to denigrate it and to actually downgrade it from at a program, the 5th department in the College of Ethnic Studies, to a mere minor, just like any other minor. I mean, this is really what they're trying to do now. This is what their sort of the plan is. So I don't know about kind of like, the union is really fighting for this, and the union is in it. And tomorrow, actually, we're going to start negotiating between, I know this is, we will broadcast this later on, so it's okay for me to say this now. Tomorrow, the union starts negotiating with the university over our contract, over our collective bargaining agreement. And there is a very big connection between the labor conditions at the university and the fact that our labor, Tomomi and mine, and all the time that we put into it and everything we've done is sort of completely erased and completely invisibilized, and not only disrespected, but also we're punished for it. I mean, this is kind of like, the more you do, the more you get punished. The more and a lot of the times now, I don't even advertise what I'm doing because I'm so afraid something would happen. We have a very successful grievance on September 30th. And I was talking to my union president and he said, this was really great, wonderful. I said, okay, wait. Saturday morning, I got the nasty email. I mean, it doesn't stop, it continues. So the question is, some people think that, should we really even struggle within the university? The other people say that, okay, leave it alone. So when you say the university, should we struggle at the public and the private university? And my question is, my answer is that, do we have a choice? If we are already at the university, I mean, I believe that the world, we should struggle all over the world. We should be connecting with everybody. The university is not an exceptional site, or the site that some academics make it seem so unique and so magical and so, special and so on. It's just like any other site. It's just the site of the struggle and so on. But also the university has resources. The university with a capital U is the place of production of knowledge. The question is, do we relinquish our struggle for the production of justice-centered knowledge and allow the Koch brothers and the Adelsons and the JCRC and all these and campus reform, by the way, I should say that campus reform has played also a very big role into all of this stuff. We haven't even gotten to that. Do we allow them to, and not hijack, and I don't really like to say hijack because hijack means as if they really don't know they're innocent bystanders and so on. No, to actually take over the university and turn it into something in which they use the sanitized language to make business as usual, normalization of repression, something that the status quo is okay. And this is exactly what San Francisco State is doing now. And so this is kind of like they ran out of various things in the various battles and the various rendition. So I don't know. I don't know what we should do. But as long as we are educators, don't we have a responsibility? And a lot of the times I think about, am I wasting my time? Should I really just be like organizing with other Palestinians, with other scholars who are here, with other activists who are on the list and so on, outside of the university, and just like, don't waste my time with all this paperwork, with all, I mean, they create a bureaucracy is inventive of bureaucracy. They love to do that. Is this something that I should be wasting my time, or should I just like leave it alone and do something else? And I keep going back and forth. So I don't think there is, for me, there isn't an answer. As long as I am there, I have to continue fighting and speaking. But at the end of the day, we really need to have a collective movement, not only to have, kind of like construct solidarities with each other and so on, but to actually, how do we intervene to hold them accountable, to expose them, to make it impossible for them? But then comes a question for some of us who are, let's say, Marxists, critics, anarchist critics, critics who have critiques of the system itself and the system of capitalism and neoliberalism and so on, is that institutions of the state that in itself is a settler colonial state, how much can you reform them? And what do you do that? Which also goes back to the union labor argument. What do we do? And I'm always thinking about that, and I'm speaking aloud about it because I'm just sick and tired of actually doing this again and again and again. It's exhausting. It's exhausting that every single day, instead of me doing something really exciting with colleagues, with students, with people in Palestine, I mean, even in Arabic also, just like stay away from English for a little bit, goes out the window because I'm so busy. And this is really part of it. It's not only the labor that they make you put into it. It's also they try to take you out of commission completely by this again and again until you get to the point where you say, you know what, I've been hazed enough. I give up. And this is exactly what that. So I do not know what other colleagues think, what other comrades think about. What do you think about it? Like we all are presented with this because there is also a very chilling environment towards also junior scholars, not only senior scholars. There is chilling environment against the students. There is chilling environment. Don't dare think. Or if you want to think this is the ceiling of your thinking, you can't think beyond it. Because if you think beyond it, we're going to come and crush the hell out of you. So you not only you will shut up, but we're teaching a lesson to everybody else, just like Brooke Goldstein said.
So go ahead.
So I will say to Rabab, of course, we have to keep fighting and taking lead from people like you. I mean, I'll say something like counter to what we've been talking about today. I think things have really moved forward in universities the last 10 years around Palestine, okay? Despite the continuing repression, right? I mean, Stephen Slida paid a terrible price at the University of Illinois, right? But I remember that I think 20,000 people, most of them academics, signed a petition to basically criticize the university for firing him. That was unimaginable 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, right? I was in a small group a couple of years ago. We developed a website called Against Canary Mission. And everybody here knows Canary Mission. Everybody here is probably on Canary Mission. Anonymous, smear faculty and administrators to basically say, if you sign this, it means you will reject using anything you find on Canary Mission when you're admitting students or you're doing hiring. We got 1,000 people to sign it. I was shocked. Now, I mean, that's not to say that the war is over, but I think it's because of the work that people here continue to do that the discourse is changing. And for me, as somebody who's with US ACB, Palestinians have made it clear that they think the university is an important side of struggle here, right? The academic boycott is one of the 3 planks of the movement. So for all those reasons, I think is really critical. And lastly, just to come back to this question of the state, the fact that Zoom and the San Francisco State University are willing to accept wholesale the United States State Department's definition of terrorism means we have no choice. These criteria are going to be forced upon us, whether we don't want to accept them, but we live with them 24 hours a day. So we have to, I think, interrogate them because we have no choice. I guess we have no choice in it, justice. We have no choice too, because the state and the corporate world is constantly going to try to destroy us if we stand still. And the only way I think to stay alive is to keep moving. So that's my thought.
Fair enough, but I'm just going to recount and say that, and this is for our discussion, I don't know how much we want to use, is that the problem is that Stephen Salaita was fired. I mean, we had 20,000 people. And so I'm not, I'm still fighting. So I'm going to fight until I die from my deathbed. There is no way in hell, I say over my dead body, but I'm only asking about the cost it takes and the labor and the ways in which the price that it's exacted. So the question is that I'm trying to think about like what other recourse can we within and outside of the university, because actually just working within the university kills you. It is death by 10,000 cuts. I mean, it really is. And so because they're inventive, they're the powers that be. So, and the discourse has changed, but their discourse has changed as well. So I think it's a question about like, what do we do within and outside of the university? And I do agree 100% that we've changed a lot of minds. And of course, justice always like this. Of course, you're always moving and getting more people. But the question is what would it be required in order for us to actually within and outside? Because a lot of people are actually skeptical about even pursuing academic careers because of the ways in which it punishes you to do so. So the question is kind of like, people are struggling in the streets and so on. So what do you do about it? You talk about it, you bring it to your classes, you write about it and so on. And then, you know, the sword comes back again and again. The boot is on your neck again and again and again. And the problem, I think, with the academy is not recognizable. This is the problem, is that the punishment in the academy is not recognizable as brutal, as nasty, as laborsome as it is outside of the academy. So, like, you know, I'll say something, but then a lot of the times I have to shy away and shut up because, like, what's happening to me compared to people who are tortured in prison? I mean, the thing is that I should be comparing to myself to other academics. I shouldn't be comparing myself or the ideal conditions of my job. But it's also because we're all activists and we're all part of this collective experience. These questions keep coming up because we're not detached from the real world outside of the boundaries of the university. So I'm basically, maybe I'm asking another question, and maybe like, what does it do? Where does it get to the point where you say, okay, San Francisco State University, it's a lost cause. That doesn't mean we stop the struggle for the university. I mean, the students at San Francisco State passed a resolution, the whole student government, not just the Palestinian, a resolution to divest from companies that do business with the occupation. The university president wrote them an email saying, I'm not going to honor your decision, i.e., I'm going to violate your democratic right to decide what you want to do, because this does not fit with my beliefs, with my relationship, with the Zionist donors, and with the connection that we have. So I think the reason I'm asking about this is actually like, so what do you do in this particular instance? And San Francisco State is not the only example. It has happened in so many other campuses. So what do you do? Do you try to build another department? Do you walk away and you try to do something else? Do you like kind of like lay low until the storm passes, which some people in social movements say? Charlotte wants to say something, man.
Well, it's not a direct response to this, and I know that this panel is ending in a couple of minutes, but I do think that this is an important idea regarding the constant accumulation of kind of ongoing struggle that prevents other work from being done, because every hour that needs to be spent fighting criminalization is an hour that can't be spent doing something else. And fighting against criminalizing Palestine isn't exactly the same thing as fighting for the liberation of Palestine either, because one's a very defensive struggle and the other one is not. And so there's this constant struggle for balance, right, in terms of the need to fight off repression and also not allow the battle against repression to overwhelm the reason for the repression in the first place. So, you know, how do we, yes, we need to preserve academic freedom, but we're not trying to preserve academic freedom as a kind of, as just an ideal that exists out there in the world, but because there are lives and struggles that are being impacted by this. And so, you know, I think this is one of the challenges that comes up a lot of times, where we'll say that, you know, some official or somebody saying, yes, it's legal to boycott Israel is the same thing as a victory for the boycott of Israel. And really, it's not. I mean, it's something, but it's not a victory for the boycott of Israel. It's very limited in what it is, which is simply, oh, for now we're convinced you're not violating the law. So one thing that can be done to do that is to change the law. And so, you know, this is a problem that comes up very frequently in this movement. one other thing is just the issue of criminalization overall, and the issue of terrorist listing. Obviously, that's not necessarily the battle that everybody needs to take on, but they're really, obviously, this open classroom was not a violation of the material support statute, like not as it's written, not as it's been interpreted, not in any other way. But one of the reasons why these kinds of laws exist is not to lock up people and send them to jail for material support. There are cases, obviously, glaring cases, glaring miscarriages of justice. The Holy Land Five are still in U.S. prisons on these charges, and many others as well. But I mean, specifically in the Palestinian context. But the purpose of material support law isn't really to engage in a very expensive prosecution and lock people up and throw them in jail. The purpose of material support law is to engage in a broader act of discipline, so that what you have is people attempting to talk about Palestinian politics and feeling like they cannot say the names of any Palestinian political party while attempting to talk about Palestinian politics. And so then the question becomes, how much of a conversation about Palestinian politics are we having if we don't speak about the political forces that are involved in that struggle? And so this is, and so that's one of the purposes of these laws, right? Is so that when we speak and talk about Palestine, even in our activism, we reshape what we say in order to try to avoid these kinds of unjust laws, which are fundamentally unjust to begin with. And so there is a need really to have a broader reckoning with anti-terrorism laws and what they mean for entire communities and entire societies. Because they do fundamentally change the way we speak about, learn about, and talk about Palestine and talk about liberation struggles. So I know we're reaching time, and I don't want to take away the last minutes from the presenters, but I do think this is something that requires more attention from the movement in general in the coming period.
Thank you. We actually are at the end of the time, and we probably should allow ourselves a bit of a break before we come back. So I don't know if Rabab or Tamomi, you have any last words to close us out of this, but I hope that we'll see you again shortly. Have you any words?
I'm okay. I just wanted to see if some of our comrades might not be coming back, if they have something to say before we leave, because but I think what Bill was saying also is not in contradiction with what Charlotte is saying or what I'm saying. We're actually brainstorming, and I'm just debating about how do we use this, because the discussion is really great, and this is what we really need to be brainstorming on. But we're on a public session for ASA, so like we're watching. So I think I just want to kind of like just say that it's not about kind of like ending the conversation. So I'm not sure how we can like, where do we go? Maybe, I mean, the next panel, but maybe Bill, you have something else to say. And I know Grace is going to be on the next session, and I don't want to take your time. To Mommy, also maybe you want to say something. But that's my thoughts.
I'm good for now. So.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to enforce a 10-minute, 11-minute break. Thank you all so much. We'll see you hopefully in the next session, and really appreciate your presence.